Thanks for joining us for this week's devotion. I got to ask you a question today. I got a feeling you can relate. Have you ever been the last one picked? Was there ever a time when you were a kid in school and maybe they were choosing sides for a basketball team or a volleyball team or a soccer team, and that feeling that you had when you were the very last person standing? I remember that. There was a time in my life when I was really tall, but my coordination hadn't caught up, and I'll never forget how lonely. I felt like I had this flashing neon light over my head that said loser. Have you ever felt that way? And then I've got another question for you. Have you ever felt like that whatever you do day to day, maybe you're a stay-home mom, maybe you're a housewife, maybe you are a teacher, maybe you're a big businessman, maybe you're in college, maybe you're in high school, I don't know. But have you ever felt like that where you are right now in life, you're going nowhere, that there's really no purpose behind it, that there's really no meaning? Well, if you've ever felt one of those two ways, and I bet you have, I've got really good news. This week we studied the life of David. Now, you have to realize David was a guy who was a sheep herder. Not the most appealing job. Not the most lucrative job. Basically, if you know anything about sheep, you know they're not very intelligent animals. So here was a guy that was really isolated. He was kind of out in the wilderness and tending sheep all day long. He didn't have a lot of interaction with other people. So one day there's a prophet named Samuel, and he comes to David's hometown because God has told him that he's going to select a king. Why? Because the preceding king, the first king named Saul, had been rejected because of his disobedience. We could go pretty far right there, but we won't. So there they are, and they bring all of Jesse's sons, all of David's brothers are brought to this meeting. Now, the responsibility was to bring all the sons, but they didn't even bother bringing David. Because in their mind, I mean, what could David accomplish? I mean, he's just a teenage boy. He's young. He has no experience. He's probably not the best communicator because he doesn't ever talk to people. It's only sheep. So this meeting with Samuel takes place, and he goes through all the sons, and he says, basically, did you bring all the sons? And they said, well, there's one left, but he's just a sheep herder. They went out and got David, and wouldn't you know, David was the one that God had selected. Now, if you and I would have been at this meeting between Samuel and all these sons of Jesse, we probably would have been no different than everybody else. We would have thought, I mean, what can David do? He's so young. I mean, all the older brothers, they have experience in war. Many of them are gladiators. They're military men. But David's so young, and his resume is so short. But yet there's a great verse in this chapter in 1 Samuel that says that although man looks on the outward appearance, God looks on the heart. And so David was selected. God's hand came upon David because sometimes God uses the most least likely people. Maybe that's you today. You feel like you're in the wilderness. You feel like you're going nowhere. Hey, do you know, when you look at all the people that even Jesus used in the New Testament, they were some of the most unlikely characters that you would have ever thought. Now, the second part of this story, I asked you the other question, did you ever feel like maybe your life was mundane and going nowhere? Do you realize that once that David was selected, that Samuel needed someone to comfort him? He had heard that David played the harp, and he brought David into the army camp to do nothing but play a harp. Well, can you imagine all the experience that David got as a result of being in the court of the king? Now, technically, he was an armor bearer, but Saul was being troubled by an evil spirit, and so when David would play the harp, Saul would become comforted. But God had a much bigger plan. That little, small, insignificant gift of playing the harp is what God was going to use to bring David before great men. He learned leadership skills by being around Saul. He learned about commanding an army. There were so many things that God was going to use during that time in David's life to prepare him for where he was going to take him. Even all those lonesome, lonely days out in the wilderness, tending sheep, honing his skills as a harpist, yeah, they all had a bigger plan. I want you to know that God's got a bigger plan for your life than what you see now as well. Maybe you feel like David. Maybe you're the last one picked. Maybe all the things you're doing seem to be taking you nowhere. But I'll tell you this much. If you're seeking the face of God and you're walking in obedience, the Lord is going to use many of those experiences, some of which seem very insignificant, to bring you before greatness. Can you have the faith today to believe that God is combing you and preparing you for something amazing? That's His plan. So what you got to do is be faithful where you're at today. Walk by faith and trust God. Ask God to give you a content spirit and use your todays as preparations for tomorrow. No, you may have been picked last by others, but you won't be picked last by God.